All right, here we are for Lunch Therapy. This is Joel Marshall, your host. Lunch Therapy is a show that happens on Tuesdays and Fridays. Fridays, we have Interview Fridays. There are a lot of cats around today. I don't know, maybe just everybody loves cats. Let's face it, they're the most popular thing on the internet. I want to talk to you. We're going to New York right now to meet Edoardo Ballerini. He's our guest today. We're very lucky to have him. Behind me is a poster from a show that's happening in Los Angeles tonight, tomorrow. There's 3 shows. It's called Both, A Hard Day's Silent Night. It's put on by the Open Fist Theater, and I hope you all will get down there to the Broad Theater and check this thing out. It's in Santa Monica. I will be there this evening. And I hope that you all come down. It's at 8 o'clock at the Eli and Edith Broad stage in Santa Monica, California. There's Guignel. Good to see you, Guignel. We got a great guest for you today. It's going to be incredible. Let's watch just a trailer for the show that I was just speaking of, Both.
Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun, and I say it's all right.
Seems that tonight is your last chance to see this show, December 22nd. So it's a bunch of Broadway singers doing songs of the Beatles. What more could you want? Let's get into this thing. It's called Lunch Therapy. All right, healing vibrations. At the top of the show, we like to breathe. It's a tradition on this show. Now it's the holidays, so we have behind us healing vibrations. They oftentimes lend us some relaxing music. My guest today, Edoardo, also does some relaxing stories on the Calm app, so you might want to check that out. Jose Salas is here. Happy Commando Friday. Good to see you, Jose. Happy holidays. All right, so we're going to take 3 deep breaths, in through the nose, out through the toes. Hold it. Let it go. Yes, here in Los Angeles, we've been having a storm, a rainstorm. Power went out last night. In through the nose, out through the toes. Let it go. Yes, stimulate the vagus nerve, Guignel says. Guignel is all the way down there in Mexico watching the show, so that's really cool. Vagus nerve is a nerve that runs through your entire body. In through the nose, out through the toes. Hold it. Let it go. That's great. So yeah, a lot of times the breathing can help you relax the nerves, calm the nerves. That's why we do it on the show. I know it's the holidays. Some people find the holidays stressful. We go home, we see family. Sometimes we haven't seen each other in a long time. Sometimes we fall back into old habits. Sometimes people drink too much. Who knows? All kinds of different things. But you know what will help you through that? Breathing with one another, taking the time to sit in silence. Maybe go see a musical. Seems like a good idea. One more breath, in through the nose, out through the toes. Hold it. And let it go. Okay, I'm really excited about my guest today. Edoardo Ballerini. He is an actor. He is a voiceover artist, or a storyteller is what I like to say. He narrates books for Audible and for all kinds of different things. He's an amazingly talented guy. He was on The Sopranos. A lot of you might have seen him on The Sopranos. He played a junkie named Corky. Right now, he's appearing in Murder at the End of the World, which is a show on FX on Hulu. I don't know. Are they merged now? I don't know how that works. He also was on Boardwalk Empire. He played Rudolph Valentino in his own film, Night Valentino, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. He's also an award-winning narrator, as I said before, including he narrated the 135-hour, 6-volume, 3,000-plus page opus, My Struggle, by Carl... Oh, no, this is going to be difficult. Ove Knausgaard. I don't know how to pronounce it. I heard it pronounced, and I'm sure I just destroyed it. He received the Earphones Award from AudioFile magazine, and a feature in the New York Times magazine called him the voice of God, partially because of his narration of the Hebrew Bible. He also tells stories for the New York Times, tells, like I said before, sleep stories on the Calm app, and narrates articles for the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Rolling Stone, and Vanity Fair. Pretty exciting. Pretty exciting. He also speaks Italian and grew up living between Italy and the United States. Let's get into this thing we call Interview Friday.
Narrated by Edoardo Ballerini.
And the Audi goes to Edoardo Ballerini.
Thank you to all my fellow actors and narrators. I listen to you every day, and I'm awed by what you do. Any one of you could be standing here. So congratulations to all of you for growing this industry and putting the audio in audiobooks. It is a shock to be here, which is why I had two speechwriters aged 7 and 4 write my speech for me, because I knew I would have no idea what to say. This is the front. This is the 3 sentences. They're very good. Thank you for this award. It is very precious to me. I love you.
Welcome, Edoardo Ballerini, to Lunch Therapy.
Thank you, Joel, for having me.
It's so great to have you here. Yeah.
And thank you for playing that clip at the Audio Awards. I'd sort of forgotten about that. That was that was really charming.
I love it. You know, we have a lot of stand-up comedians on the show, and that was stand-up comedy worthy, I think.
Oh, thank you.
I loved it. I loved it. Okay, I want to ask you, first of all, right off the bat, about this show that you're in, Murder at the End of the World, which is, I just started watching that on Hulu. Really interesting program, really interesting character that you're playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should I just jump in and talk about the character?
Yeah, I would love it. I'd love it if you talk about that.
All right. So, I'm going to have to be a little careful with the spoilers here, so I'm not going to say too much. So the character I play is an AI bot.
Yeah.
He's, imagine an Alexa or a Siri device, but you actually see this thing,
Yeah.
and it's a fascinating character. And so it was written a few years back. The creators Britt Marling and Salbak Manglish wrote it, and I remember at one point being on set and we were filming it, and a part of me was thinking like, they probably could have gotten an actual AI to do this role, right? I mean,
Yeah, I
but
guess
when they
so.
kind of conceived of it, believe it or not, the technology's moved so fast in the last few years that it really wasn't there. Um, and I'm extraordinarily grateful it wasn't there, because it was a fantastic role to play.
Yes.
And what I've been telling people, and I think this may be true, is that I could be the last human to take a job away from AI.
I love that. That's
That could be
good.
my claim to fame.
Ah,
Thank you.
thank you.
And so the show's a murder mystery in that sort of Agatha Christie style, and it stars Emma Corrin and Clive Owen, and Britt Marling herself is in it. And so I'm not going to say too much about it, because it's a wonderfully like twisting sort of murder mystery plot that winds along.
I do want to
All
ask you.
episodes are out now, so
Yeah, they're all
people
out there.
people can binge it now.
I want to ask you about that. You do a lot of audio work
Yeah.
for narration and things like that. Do you think that they cast you in this role because of that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the character, for those who haven't seen it, exists both on screen and off. So sometimes you see him as like a projection against a wall, or on somebody's iPhone or something like that. And sometimes you just hear him the way you hear
Yeah.
an Alexa or a Siri. And what's crazy is you're exactly right. In fact, something came out in Variety, I think yesterday, about this, that they were talking to Britt and Zal, the creators and directors, and they're like, how did you cast me? And they said that, and they told me this, that while they were writing, they had listened to a New Yorker article that I narrated,
Oh, yeah.
which actually happened to be a profile of Luca Guadagnino, who is the Italian director who directed, oh my God, Call Me by Your Name, and other films. And so Zal had been listening to this, and then he said, I think this is the voice of the AI. His name is
Wow.
Ray in the
Yeah.
series, and played some for Britt, and she was like, yeah, I think that's the voice. And then I guess they thought, I could also be the face of it, which was
Yeah.
worked out nicely for me.
Yeah.
But then they told me that they started writing the role with my voice in mind,
Wow.
which is kind of crazy.
That is
that doesn't
cool.
happen very often. Yeah, it was kind
No.
of cool.
And it also doesn't happen very often when you haven't shot the show yet, right? I mean, did they had
No,
you
and
shot
so then
something?
no, we had not shot anything. And so then we
Wow.
did a kind of a screen test on a soundstage. I mean, it was already scripted that you were going to see this character, but in retrospect, I'm almost wondering, it's like, were they doing this screen test to see if they wanted to see the character, or if they just wanted to hear the character? I think it was too late for that. You're going to have to see him.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we shot this screen test on this soundstage in Jersey City, and I remember, I'll tell you. So very briefly, for people who don't know my career, so I worked in film and TV for a long time.
Yes.
Shows that you mentioned, other things, and then my life and career pivoted away towards narration and audiobooks and all that good stuff. And it happened very organically. All of a sudden, the audio world was getting big, and I was sort of in the right place at the right time, and started getting awards. And at the same time, I also had 2 little kids, and so I was like, "This is great. I want to be at home. I get to make my own schedule. Perfect." I didn't know if I was ever going to act, in front of a camera again.
Really?
And then I wasn't sure. It's like,
Yeah.
you grow, you go through different phases of your life. Different things are happening, and
Totally.
I started getting very this. By the way, I'm in my studio.
Yeah, it's nice.
So and so this is right in my basement. I get to work here. I get to stop when I want. I get to go pick up the kids. All that kind of stuff. And it's
Yeah.
like, this is nice. Anyway, this offer came. It was only shooting in New Jersey. I live in New York. And I was like, great. Let's do this. Let's dip our
Yeah.
toes back into this water. And on that day of that screen test, I was terrified.
Really?
I hadn't been in front of a camera
Yeah.
in 7 years, 8 years. I hadn't been on a stage like that. And the way it was set up, it was just me, right? I wasn't even with any other actors. I wasn't doing a scene or anything. And I remember there was like a couple of like Apple boxes, those things that they use to prop things
Stand
up
on.
on and stuff. Yeah, stand on, lift things up. And so it was just like me and a couple of Apple boxes, and then pitch black. And on top of that, this was still during COVID.
Yeah.
Everybody was masked.
Oh, how weird.
So
Yeah.
it was so freaky, right? I didn't see anybody's face. Like, so
God.
there's Britt, there's Saul, there are the producers, there's all these other people, camera
Like you're in the
department.
future.
Yeah, the guys, fixing your collar, putting on your
Yeah.
makeup. Like, I didn't see anybody's face. And it was this very dark, and I was just crapping myself. I was like,
Are they going to kidnap me? What's happening?
Yeah, exactly. That van outside looks suspicious. And so it went well. And then the rest of my shoot on this show was kind of similar in that, as you can imagine, because a lot of it's projected, it was shot on a green screen. So I'm assuming people kind of know what that is, but for those who don't, it's like you're just an actor in front of a wall of color, and then they do After Effects and the special effects
Like
work
this.
to, hey, there you go. And then, in this case, then you can take the actor out and put them wherever you want.
Yeah.
And so it was basically me acting by myself in front of green screens a lot of the time. And I wouldn't even have the other cast members there with me to read their lines in. I would have somebody, some poor guy who got wrangled into doing it, would be reading with me. And so it was this very, very surreal experience, and like, what a strange way to get back into acting. But to your point, it all started because there was this connection to the audio world, which I always tell people, like, you just don't know. Right. You just don't know
idea where things are going to happen, right?
Where things are going to go. You don't know
Yeah.
who's listening to you, who's seeing you. Like, you could be doing a show, you're doing a gig, there's only 20 people in the room.
Yeah.
If one of those 20 people is the right person,
Yep.
the next year you're on a sitcom.
I always say that
just,
it's not about
yeah.
like how many people, it's about who.
Right.
You know?
So this was a particularly strange one.
Yeah.
Obviously, in my case, it helped that I had the background in film and TV,
Yes. And you have quite a background in film and TV.
Well, thank you. It's
You
been
do.
an up and down journey, as most careers are.
As most
but thank you, I
careers are,
appreciate it.
especially in this business. You just never know.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
go back a little bit. Well, let's go back a lot. Your dad was a poet, right?
Still
a
is.
famous
Yeah.
poet. Your dad
Yeah.
is a famous poet. Yes,
Yeah.
of course. But growing up, you grew up with a dad who was a poet.
That's right.
And Luigi Ballerini, right? That's
Correct,
his name.
yeah.
What
And my
was that
mother
like?
is a-
And your
and my
your
mother's a
mother's
photo historian.
She is, and she's an American,
yeah.
and your dad was
She's
from
American.
Italy, right?
Correct, yeah. So yeah, my dad came over when he was 20. He came over to go to school, to university here. And believe it or not, he met my mother and this is how far back we're going, on the boat over from Europe to the United States.
Really?
She was, there were planes. Don't get me wrong. Wasn't the 19th century.
Yeah.
But people back then still took transatlantic boats. So we're talking 1960, 61, something like that. Anyway, so my mother was coming back from her junior year abroad, and my father was coming over for 1 year on a Fulbright scholarship. And they met on this boat, and, then they started dating, etc. Eventually had a child. And so, yeah, my dad's a poet. I grew up in New York City. He taught at NYU. And I grew up in this household, in this downtown loft, and there were always a bunch of like artists and writers and poets and musicians and, hanging out. It was this very sort of bohemian, kind of loungy kind of environment. And that's kind of what I grew up in. I grew up, around Union Square, for people who know the city. My dad, as I said, taught at NYU, so I was downtown. And it was downtown in a very different era of New York. It was much grittier, much more arty.
What did you think you were going to do when you were a kid? Like, what did you think you would be when you grew up?
That's an interesting question. I was a pretty creative kid. I like to
Hmm.
draw and write and that kind of stuff. And then at some point, I guess in middle school, my brain kind of turned over to like math and science, and I started
Interesting.
getting good at math and science. It was very brief.
Hmm.
And then by the time I got to high school, I was sort of back to the writing side. I never thought I'd be an actor. I
Really?
did some act. No, I did some acting as a kid.
Hmm.
Believe it or not, I did a play at a place called Theater for the New City when I was 10 years old. And I did some other little things like that. Uh, and then it was never all that interesting to me. I wanted to be a writer probably. And so high school, I read a lot of poetry, read a lot of fiction. College, I went to a school called Wesleyan University in Connecticut.
Hmm.
And there I got really into literature. It was all about like James Joyce and all that kind of stuff. And I figured I would be a scholar. I figured I would kind of go the academic route, be a professor somewhere. Um, that's what I kind of imagined for myself. And then one summer, right after graduation, here's a weird story. Uh, I was given a very small scholarship to go study Latin uh, with a priest at the Vatican the summer after
Really?
I graduated from Wesleyan. Yeah, I mean, I applied for this scholarship,
Yeah.
but I got a little bit of money. Said you can go do this Latin course. It was an American priest, Reggie Foster, who taught at the Vatican, and he taught this summer course of Latin for free. So all you had to
Wow.
do was get yourself over there and find some sort of housing arrangement, and you had to apply to his class, but
Yeah.
you could attend Reggie Foster's Latin, 6-week, 8-week seminar. So I fly over there right after graduating college. After about 2-3 weeks, I'm like, what am I doing? This is crazy. I'm studying. I'm literally studying
Great
Latin
though.
in the
It's
Vatican.
incredible.
Uh, yeah, and I was way out of my league. Like I had studied some Latin, yes, I'd done a few years, but the
Hmm.
people who were in this class were like, they were serious
Yeah.
scholars on
Yeah.
their way to graduate programs at Yale and stuff. And I was just like, oh, it'd be fun to spend a summer in Rome.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I quit the class and I
Yeah.
joined a theater company.
Wow.
It was an American theater company in Rome. It was all these expats, and to be fair, that was fairly short-lived too.
Yeah.
I didn't last very long with them, but I just wanted to do something.
Hmm.
And so mostly that summer I ended up wandering around Rome by myself.
That's
That
not a
was
bad
kind of
thing. It's not a bad
No,
thing.
it's not terrible,
And
but
did you speak Italian at the time too?
I I do. I
So
grew
you're
up
used to it.
bilingual.
You
Yeah.
grew up.
So yeah, so
Wow.
that part was fine. And I understand the Italian culture and all of that. So, that wasn't too hard for me. But, when you're 22 years old and you're wandering around a city by yourself, it gets kind of hard. It gets kind of
Yeah.
lonely.
Yeah. It
And
does.
especially
It does.
in an
It's true.
era, pre-internet and all that stuff, you're really just
Hmm.
kind of on your own.
Yeah.
So
Did you come back and start studying acting then?
yeah, so I came back to New York and I jumped into some acting classes at a place called HB Studios
Hmm.
in New York.
A lot of the
Then
great
I
actors come out of there. A lot of the people
Yeah,
we talked to on this
there's a
show went there.
yeah, it's a great place to start in the city. It was very
Hmm.
affordable back then. I don't know if it is still now. And it was pretty much a place where you could just sign up. You didn't
Yeah.
have to really apply to get into the program.
Hmm.
Then I went over to the Lee Strasberg Institute for a couple of
Hmm.
years. And then I ended up at the Actors Studio, not as a member, but I would be an observer, what they
Hmm.
called. And so I was in part of this little program where you could watch these great actors come, work, and these great directors would come in and stuff. And so I just kind of sat in the balcony and watched all these people for a while.
Nice.
And then it's just sort of started rolling. I got a little guest spot on Law and Order.
Yeah.
I got a
You were
couple
were
of
you on
little
NYPD Blue as well?
I was on NYPD Blue years
Oh,
later though.
yeah.
And then I got a couple little small roles in films.
Hmm.
And then it just sort of kept rolling and kept rolling. And I think this happens to a lot of people. Like suddenly you wake up and you're like, I guess this is what I do, right? Like,
Well, that's nice.
like,
That's a good way for
yeah,
it to happen. That's the
yeah.
ideal
But
way.
yeah, I just mean that like at some point, no matter what your intention was, or no matter
Yeah.
how you got there, at some point you're kind of in this
Yeah.
career, in this world.
Yeah.
And it's just, you get further and further along with it. You get 8 years in, 10 years in, 12 years in, and you're like, I guess there's no going back now.
Right. There's a little bit of that with the
Right.
arts, for sure. You get down the road and then you see all your friends
Right.
have gone down another road, maybe, your
Right.
friends from
Right.
school and stuff. And you're like, wow, I guess I'm
Yeah.
in this lane.
Yeah, exactly. You're like, I guess I'm
For
gonna be
better
over
or for
here.
worse, this is where I
I
am.
hope it works out, because this is where I live now. And like
So
I
true.
said, it's had its ups and downs, it's had its
Yeah.
bumps, but it's largely been a good ride. So
Yeah. I want to play a little clip here. I want to get to talking about The Sopranos, but I want to play this
Okay.
clip from this movie called Dinner Rush, because it just gives an idea of your work.
How are we doing?
You are a genius, young man. A fucking genius.
Thank you. I'm sorry it took so long, but I wanted to make something special. What did you think?
She's thinking about what's coming next. So tell me, chef, what is the history behind this culinary creation?
Actually, it's a dish my Uncle Enrico used to love.
Is that Uncle Enrico on the menu?
Oh, on the menu, no. Hey, Adamir, can I have a menu? On the menu is a picture of my father and his grandfather. They're playing in a backyard in New Jersey.
Then who's Gigino? Honey, you're asking way too many questions. Will you leave Udo alone,
No, it's
please?
all right. I get asked all the time. It's fine. My father's real name is Luigi. Gigi is the nickname for that, and Gigino is Little Gigi. Italians are crazy about nicknames, I guess. I'm gonna have something else sent up in a minute, and if there's anything you need, don't hesitate to ask.
Oh,
Hey.
Damn, he's cute.
Damn, he's cute. Nice.
I love how Sandra Bernhard steals the scene with that glance. Right?
Yeah,
She
yeah.
just has this look.
That's
She's
great.
just like, oh God. I love that film, though. Thank you for playing that.
Yeah, it's a nice film. And did you get this after The Sopranos, this movie? Or
No, that was before.
So what? So you were playing a chef. Now your dad was somewhat involved in culinary arts as well, right? I mean, did he?
So that came later. My dad wrote a
Yeah.
book about
Yeah.
food stuff, and it's really funny that in the movie, you probably noticed, I say my father's name is Luigi
Yeah.
Gigino.
Yeah.
Total coincidence.
Total coincidence.
The restaurant we shot in was called Gigino's, and it was actually owned by Bob Giraldi, the director. And so he just used his own restaurant for the place. And it was just a
Nice.
complete coincidence that I get to say in a scene, my father's name is Luigi.
That's so cool. So cool. So
Yeah.
what a great part for you. And was that like a seminal part of your career? Like, was that a big
Yeah,
moment?
that was-
you had
that was-
the lead in a feature film.
Yeah, that was so Danny Aiello, the
Mhm.
late great Danny Aiello, and I are kind of the co-leads of it. We play father and son,
Yeah.
and so in many ways it's my film, and in many ways it's Danny's film. But for me, yeah, it was the first big significant role I had in a film, and it really exposed me to the industry in a whole new way. We went to a lot of film festivals. It was the first time I ever did international press junkets, which
Yeah.
was kind of fun.
Yeah, that must have been.
Had an amazing trip to Tokyo. I was there for like 10 days doing interviews and photo shoots and stuff, and I'd never experienced that kind of thing. And it got reviewed very well, sort of reviews in the New York Times, the New Yorker, all the places you want to get the good reviews.
Mhm.
And so it opened up some doors, there's no question. Unfortunately, I will say the film did not do as well commercially as we had hoped.
Mhm.
A couple of things happened. One is that we came out right after 9/11, and
Oh,
we were very
wow.
much in New York. I think we came out 9/18 or something,
Ah,
and we were very much a New York film.
yeah.
And we were playing in a lot of New York theaters. And so, not to get too far into the weeds with
Yeah.
people, but, in the film releasing business, you want what they call a high per screen average,
Mhm.
meaning you want a lot of people to show up in the theater to see your movie so that the movie theaters can say, hey, we made, $20,000 a screening, right?
Yeah.
And then the next movie theater says, oh, we want that movie, and so then you grow. So we had a pretty lousy per screen average. We were on
Yeah.
a lot of screens and people weren't really going to movies. So that didn't help. It has since, however, become a kind of like cult fan favorite.
Yeah, it seems
which
like
is-
a good
which is-
one.
Yeah.
It
and it's
reminds
really
me
kinda
of The
cool.
Bear, really. It's sort of like an early The Bear.
It was before, no, it was after Big Night. But it was before that whole crazy explosion of like cooking shows and like Master Chef shows and all that stuff, and the whole like restaurant foodie world of New York, which went absolutely ballistic. And so in a weird way, we were a little ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
I think if that movie had come out 3-4 years later, it would have been a very different experience. But as I said, I love the fact that it is this like cult classic, and especially for New Yorkers who lived in New York in that time, it's like everybody knows that film. They're just like,
that's so
oh yeah,
cool.
Dinner Rush. Yeah, they're like, that was like a slice of New York. That was a moment in New York, and it captured it perfectly. And so I kind of love that about it.
That's great. So I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk to you about The Sopranos, because you played this great character on there, a character also that speaks Italian, and was a junkie.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit about your experience on The Sopranos?
Sure. So I came into The Sopranos in season 6. So The Sopranos was already, this massive juggernaut, this cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
And I got cast, and if there are actors listening to this or watching this, they understand this. I got cast, and it happened very quickly, right? So I got cast on a Tuesday. I was living in LA at the time. I flew to New York on a Wednesday, and I was shooting on a Thursday, kind of thing,
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, which happens especially when you're a kind of guest star. So, and I just originally did 1 episode. I ended up in 4, I think. And so I had like almost no time to prepare, right? So I'll admit this. So what I did was I watched the movie Sid and Nancy like over and over, right?
Got to
The
do
Gary
what you got to
Oldman.
do. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, you know what? I'm just gonna. It was back
Yeah.
in the era of DVDs. I'm like, I'm gonna get the DVD, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna like. I watched it on the plane. I watched it in the hotel. Like, and I tried not to, bathe, and I tried to just kind of get messy and gritty. But I only had 48 hours, right? And so I was just like, all right, just go for it. But that was another experience where, it is this kind of like shock, right? Like, you step on to this. I remember I stepped onto this set for the first time, and there were bodyguards for the other actors.
Really?
Oh yeah, just to walk them from the makeup trailer to set.
Wow.
They had police had cordoned off the street because there were just fans lined up to watch. They weren't there for me, believe me. They were there for Michael Imperioli, who plays Christopher, right?
You had a lot
And
of
so,
scenes
like,
with him, though. So
I
you were
did,
pretty
yeah, and he's a wonderful
involved with
guy,
him.
and
Yeah.
we became friendly. But again, it was one of those, like, I was very nervous. Back to, I think, this idea of like, you step onto a set and you're very nervous.
Yeah.
And I was like, well,
Well,
use it. You're playing this
yeah.
junkie, like, you
Yeah.
can be a little jittery, right? But it's a funny one because this character Corky he's in 4 episodes, I think. It's not a huge part as far as like screen time goes, but everybody remembers
Yeah,
that
it's very
character.
impactful. That
Yeah,
character.
it's one of those like, oh yeah, the junkie on The Sopranos. Like,
Especially because he was so he had a problem, and then it was sort of sparking Imperioli's problem as well. The character on that too was like he was starting to get into drugs as well, which was a big part of the show at that
Right.
time.
yeah. So it's one of these cool little things where you just that I'm very proud of, where you just get to be this like thing in this show, and you're like, yeah,
People
and that was
remember
cool.
it. People remember
Yeah.
it. They buy the
Yeah.
the full name and everything. It's
Yeah.
really cool. Did that blow up your career at all, or what happened after that?
No, I don't know that my career's ever blown up, but
I like that.
still waiting for that.
Yeah.
No, it definitely opened up a few things. There's no
Yeah.
question. It's impossible not to, really.
Yeah.
Um, Ironically, I think so. That was late 2000s, I guess.
Hmm.
And it was shortly thereafter that I started narrating books. And one of the first big books that I did was called Beautiful Ruins by a man named Jess Walter. And that became this huge bestseller. And I won an award for that, an industry award. And what's interesting is that, so, the audiobook world has a casting process too. Just
Hmm.
like the film and TV world, they
Hmm.
try to get the right actor for the right book. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
makes sense.
And so, yeah, so this book, Beautiful Ruins, takes place in Italy and also in Old Hollywood and then in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh,
And
wow.
so this woman who worked at Harper Audio, Karen Jakonski, was a fan of mine from Dinner Rush and The Sopranos.
Oh,
So here's the tie-in.
yeah.
And so she comes to me, and I barely narrated any audiobooks at this point in my life, maybe a half a dozen. Um, and she's like, "Oh, there's this book. I think you'd be great for it." And it turns out that her husband is a chef, and they like watched Dinner Rush more than once, and it was one of their favorite
Nice.
films, right? And so again, like what we were talking about earlier, it's like you just don't know where one thing's going to lead
You
to
really
another,
don't,
right?
do you? You really
If
don't.
you
And
told me
you,
that, like, oh, you're going to play a chef in a movie, and that's going to lead to you recording an audiobook, which is then going to lead to you recording a profile in the New Yorker, which is then going to lead to you being back on a TV series, like I would have been like, what are you talking about? This makes no
yeah,
sense.
yeah.
And yet it happens.
And you embraced it too, which is really cool because a lot of times people, because they think their career is supposed to go a certain way,
Right.
they miss the opportunities. Like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? And
I do. I know exactly what you mean. And I think you're right. And I like the way you put it, that I embraced it, because I think I did. You mentioned my father's a poet, my mother's a scholar. So I grew up in this kind of literary world. And
Mhm.
so the world of books was certainly not strange to me.
Yeah,
And then being an actor, and very much like a character actor, if you think about it, if you think
yeah,
about, Corky, if you think about Udo
yeah.
and Dinner Rush, like they're very different. Um, and so you kind of need to be a character actor to do audiobooks because you're playing all the parts.
I want to hear
Um,
about that. How do you even do
yeah.
that?
Yeah, that's
You like, do you like, it feels like there's a balance,
mhm,
between doing full on characters and being the narrator of the book who's
right,
narrating about these characters. Can you talk
right.
to that a little bit?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, your job as a narrator is to follow the book, right? You
Mhm.
follow the book's lead. It's a tricky one because you certainly want people to notice your great performance, but at the
Mhm.
same time, it can't be about the actor. You kind of have to step back, and it has to be about the book. And so you follow an author's lead. And so you really want to understand what their voice is. This isn't like theater or a part where you're like, what can I do with this? Right?
Mhm.
Like, how can I take this and make it into something else? No, you really want to be faithful to what it is. So the degree to which I do characters is very much, to me, dependent on what I believe the author is doing.
Mhm.
So there are certain situations. There are some books, for example, like they're kind of big, actiony, thrillery kind of books, like a James Patterson kind of thing, where you've got your Russian mafia and you've got, this kind of stuff. And there I feel like the characters are kind of bigger. That's how they live on the page. And it's like watching an action movie.
Yeah.
And then sometimes you get a book. You mentioned Karlova
Oh,
Knausgaard, by the way.
oh, thank
Uh,
you. I knew I was in trouble. I was like, oh
yeah,
no,
that's
how am I
fine.
going to say
I,
this
I,
guy's name?
I've heard
I
it
have the
20 ways
book.
myself.
I have the
Yeah.
book, and I have your audio book as well. It's an
Where I feel
incredible
like
book. Yeah.
that's this very internal. It's first person. It's this long monologue, and so it didn't feel like big characters jumping off the page.
Yeah.
It felt like you were inside a guy's head, and
Yeah.
so I kind of played it that way. But it's always about following what you're given.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I noticed now that I know you, I noticed that I have books read by you because I love Audible books. Oh, the one in
Yeah.
particular is the Thich Nhat Hanh
Oh
book,
yeah.
which is
Yeah.
really wonderful. And now I recognize your voice in it. It's really, really nice.
I do a lot of spiritual titles,
Do
and I
you?
think in many ways those are the most important ones to me. Thich Nhat Hanh's book. I've done about, I don't know, 10, 15 of his.
Really?
I've done a few by the Dalai Lama.
Danielle
And then
says, I hear Eduardo does a great Thich Nhat Hanh impression. Well, he is essentially
that's
in
funny.
the book.
Yeah. With Thich Nhat Hanh, it's interesting. Again, one of those weird life moments. So
Yeah.
in the late 2000s, I went on a silent retreat. It was 3 days up in Santa Barbara, actually, because I was living in LA.
Mhm.
And I stopped in a bookstore, and I sitting there in the front was Pieces Every Step by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I didn't know anything about Thich Nhat Hanh, but I was just sort of intrigued by it. And I bought the book. I went to the silent retreat. So 3 days in a room, walking meditation, sits, eating in silence, all of that. And the only book I had was Pieces Every Step. And so I must have read it just sort of over and over. You know, I didn't have a phone. I didn't have any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then years later, I got asked to record it. And it was just this sort of surreal full circle moment.
I wonder why they chose you
I have no
to
idea.
record this book. It's
I
interesting.
honestly, I have no idea, but it was one of the nicer sort of coincidences that happened. And then from there, I did, as I say, about a dozen of his books.
Wow.
And I've done a number of other spiritual titles. So I love those. I selfishly get to sort of feel like, you know, it's my job to meditate, sort of, you know, it's like
Right.
I'm being hired to do a guided meditation.
You're like a
right?
therapist almost. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? Like
and
you're
it-
part
and
of a therapy.
And it's
You
in
know?
this quiet little room, you know, and the art of audiobook narration is it's very still. It's very quiet. You know, there's no sound around you, and it's usually just you and a text. And yes, you're speaking aloud, but that's it. That's the only sound in the room is these words, you know.
Can you tell us a little bit about that room? You're in New York, right? Or upstate New York?
I'm
north
just
of the city.
Yeah.
North of
Yeah.
the city.
So I moved here in 2017, I guess, and this used to be it's not that wide of a room, but it's very long. This used to be a wine cellar.
Oh, yeah. Makes
I know.
sense.
I guess. So it's in the basement, and I had a contractor come in and sort of frame it out. It was actually wider because I had to put in all the soundproofing. And then behind me, there's a glass door. There's a little window over here. But it was kind of like, it was sort of perfect, right? It was just sort of there already. And I was like, all right, I'm not a big wine drinker, so it's not like I'm going to have 400 bottles of wine. So let me turn this into a booth. And it worked out perfectly.
What
And
does the
this
big
weird
tube do? What does that do?
Well, that's my oxygen. That's the air coming in.
Really?
So, you got to breathe.
Yeah, you
I
need it.
got air. There's air coming in, and then there's another vent that actually pulls it out. So you get this like circulation of air.
And it doesn't make
And
sound or anything because you can't really
that's
have
what
anything.
the whole tube is for. So the sound kind of dies as it's traveling through the coil. So by the time
Incredible.
it comes out, it's under here. It's barely a whisper,
Yeah.
you know. So the mic would never really pick it up.
Wow.
But yeah, so it's just this room was built, and as I say, it was sort of waiting to happen, and I was doing a lot of books anyway, and so it's like, yeah.
What is the process? I mean, okay, so you're an actor and you do this. Are they separate processes that I mean, they must be, but I don't know what the prep is for a book. Like, what is your prep for a book?
So my prep, people do it differently. My prep is that I get the book and I skim it. I don't read every word. It would be, quite frankly, too time consuming. And so I skim it kind of quickly. And what I'm looking for is the author's voice, the story, obviously, the major characters, you know, all that kind of stuff. I want to have a basic sense of it. I don't want to know everything. Because part of the journey for me while I'm recording is I feel like I have to have the same journey as the listener or the reader. It's like we need to discover this together, right? So I have to trust my instincts to a degree that as we go along, I know enough and that I can then sort of fill it in as we go. And so, you know, you hope that you do know enough that you're not going to get burned and find out, like, 200 pages later that, like, oh, this guy's a completely different character.
Could you
That has,
imagine?
yeah, that has never happened.
Oh, thank God.
But some people they like to,
Like page 200, the person's like, "Why do you talk with a lisp?" And
exactly.
you're like, "Oh,
Yeah, it's
no."
like, God damn it, now I got to start over. But some people like to prepare, like, they like, make notes on every line. I just feel like it's actually it's counterproductive.
Yeah.
I like to leave a little room for improv,
I
right?
like that.
I need to be on my toes, right? If I feel like I know it too well, then I'm just kind of going through the motions.
Yeah.
So that's a book. And then, you can record, I don't know, like 4 or 5 hours in a day. Like after that, your, voice and brain just
must
turns
be
into
exhausting.
porridge.
Must be exhausting.
It is tiring, and your
Yeah.
brain just sort of turns to mush. And so, because you're just like staring at a
Yeah.
screen.
Yeah.
Um,
And what do you
and
do
so-
for? Oh, I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, and so, figure you can get, I don't know, 75, 80 pages done, and maybe 100 if you're really cranking. And so it's, 400-page
Wow.
book will take you a week,
Wow.
which is why, people can do a lot of these,
People that are good at it can do a lot of these.
Yeah, I mean, people
Yeah.
have recorded hundreds. I think I've recorded like 400 books, but there are people out there who've recorded like 1,000, 1,500.
Really?
Well, if you
Really?
figure, like, do the math. If you're doing, let's say, one a week, if you're like
Yeah.
a steady
Yeah.
narrator, let's say you're doing 50 a year.
Yeah.
In
I
10
guess
years,
so.
you're going to do 500 books.
I guess so. Do you? I still want to ask you this question. What do you do
Yeah.
about the different characters? Do you do different voices, or what do you do?
Yeah, so I do to a degree. As I was saying, like, it kind of depends on what the text is giving me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's certain cases where I feel like accents are a good thing to use, and some cases where I feel like it's no.
Yeah.
My basic rule of thumb is, like, the more literary stuff,
Yeah.
the more highbrow stuff, you stay away from the accents, because you're really just the voice of the author.
Yeah.
And the more sort of pop, bestsellery kind of stuff is where you can kind of lean into the accents a little more. That just, it feels like different material, different audiences, different expectations. So that's kind
Sometimes
of where
it's
I land.
weird when it feels weird when a man does a woman's voice in the
Yeah.
in the thing. I mean, how do you
Yeah.
usually handle that? Do you just
I
tonal
yeah
differences?
I try to do it subtly, honestly.
Yeah.
And I hope that the writing is good enough to indicate who's
Yeah.
speaking.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly not going to go into a falsetto every time there's a woman's
Yeah.
voice. I think that's ridiculous. But
Yeah.
and also you rely on the intention, right? It's like, what's the
Yeah.
character?
Sometimes it really takes me out if I'm listening to an Audible book and the man does this, "Hello, how are
Yeah,
you?"
yeah,
You know?
no,
And
yeah.
you're just like,
Turns into a Monty
I don't
Python
think I can
skit,
do
right?
it. Yeah,
Right.
right. It totally does.
I was reading to my daughter, she's 8,
Yeah.
last night, and I started doing some character voices, and she
Yeah.
stopped me. She was like, "No, that's not the right voice." I was
Oh my
like,
God.
"Oh, should we try something else?" So she basically auditioned me. So I had
Yeah.
to go through like 4 or 5 callbacks before I was able to
Good
get
to
the
read
gig.
the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that
but
you're having kids inspires your work?
wow, having kids inspires my life.
Yeah.
But yeah, very much so. I've seen my life, work, and career in a completely different light, having kids now, and it's one of the things about it which is wonderful and humbling is that, especially when they're really little, they don't know and they don't care, right? They just want you to be dad.
Yeah.
They don't care if you have a gig or don't have a gig, or won an award or didn't win an award, or
Yeah.
if you've met so and so, or haven't met so and so. They don't care. Then as they get older, it's interesting. They
Yeah.
start to, right? They start to
Uh-huh.
notice these things, right? Like, my
Mhm.
kids know that I was in this TV show.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
They know that, like, some of their friends' parents have been watching the TV show.
Oh yeah.
Uh, and that was interesting. Like, my son came home and he's like, "Oh, so and so's parents are watching the show."
Yeah.
And then I saw a friend the other night, and he was like, "Oh, I was watching the show, and my son came in right as one of your scenes was playing, and he just, like, dropped his plate. He couldn't believe that you were on the TV."
It's so
You know,
fun.
I know, and
super
so
fun.
it takes on a slightly different thing. I hope that you never lose the sense that ultimately that stuff doesn't matter, right? And what
Yeah, yeah,
matters is your
yeah.
life together. Um, but yeah, they know what I do, and they know that I'm in a show right now, and that kind of means something at this moment in my life. But with the books thing, it's funny. For a long time, they didn't want me to read to them. I was like, yeah,
So
I
funny.
was like, I'm the award-winning narrator here.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, they're like, no, mom's gonna read. I was like,
That's so funny.
I know. Well, at the same time, I was kind
Yeah.
of grateful because it's like I've just been reading for
Yes, it's
6
your
hours.
job.
Yeah.
Like you just probably don't
Yeah.
want to read after all
Right,
that.
right, right. It's like the chef who has to come home and cook dinner for his
Cook
family,
dinner.
right? He's like, just Jesus.
Do you do things outside of the show on that show? Like, do you do last week on Murder at the End
Oh,
of the World?
you mean on
I,
Hulu?
I thought I heard your voice like
Yeah,
in,
I think
like something
that
like
was
that.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah, they had me record that
it's
a
neat.
while ago. I wasn't sure if they'd used it.
I think they used it.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's kind of cool.
that's kind of cool. Yeah, so the
Yeah, it's kind
character
of
kind of
fun.
lives
Yeah,
through it.
lives
Yeah.
outside of it. So great. How does somebody get involved? Like if somebody wanted to narrate audiobooks, do you know? I mean, you kind of fell
Yeah,
into it. So do you know how people get involved in that?
yeah.
And what they should
So
do?
I will say this about it: is that it's probably the fastest growing segment of certainly of publishing. There's no
Mhm.
question. And if we can call it entertainment, it may well be the fastest growing segment in entertainment.
Mm,
I know it kind of rides this line between publishing and entertainment, so I'm not quite sure where it lands. But
yeah.
um, the point is that there's a lot of work there right now. Um, I will come back to this in a second, although
Yeah.
that work is under threat of AI
Yeah.
voices coming in
Of
to do it.
course.
There's
Of
no
course.
question.
Yeah.
But for the moment, there is a lot of work there, and there are a couple of places where, if people are interested in finding out if it's work that they want to do, there's two main places I would point people to. One is called acx.com, and that
Mhm.
is a subsidiary of Audible. And
Okay.
it's essentially a place where you can go look at titles, auditions, submit auditions, and then authors. It's like an indie marketplace,
Hmm.
and then authors will select people. Um, the other is Penguin Random House, which is a major
Oh.
publisher. They have a similar thing called Ahab,
Hmm.
and I'm not sure of the URL for that, but if you look up Ahab
Okay.
Talent, it's like a talent guide. And so what you can do is, again, you can upload samples, and these days it's not that hard to record something that sounds pretty good, even on an iPhone with a
Mhm.
very simple lav mic, you can get
Yeah.
something that sounds good.
Mhm.
And then what I always say to people is that, try it, and then you may find out whether you like it or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not work for everybody. It's a very specific kind of work. It
Mhm.
requires a certain, Zen-like, time in the
Yeah.
studio.
Yeah.
And I've met some wonderful actors, well-known actors who said they read one book and then that was it for them. They
Yeah.
couldn't do it.
Really.
They just
Really.
didn't like it. Yeah, and that's fine. And now we'll circle back to the thing
Yeah.
that I alluded to. So yeah, I mean, we can't avoid this, that artificial voices are now starting to chew up
But it's
some of this
such
work.
a personal thing listening to an audiobook. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
it's such
I
a
agree.
personal experience that it needs a person. I feel like it needs a person.
No, I agree. Where I think it's starting to make inroads, the artificial stuff, is on like nonfiction
Where
stuff,
it's just
where
trying to get the data.
kind of, yeah, it's not so
Yeah.
performative.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a lot of that. And I also, I think it's like a tool. It's how we use it. There are certain titles which, look, it costs some money to make an audiobook. It's not a particularly expensive endeavor, but
Mhm.
it costs some money. You have to pay an actor, you have to pay somebody to edit and master files and all that kind of stuff. And so there are certain people or certain titles that were never going to be made into audiobooks. It's just, they're not
Yeah.
going to, right?
Yeah.
And so in that case, like, why not, if there's a tool, make it accessible and available?
Mhm.
There's a lot of people that, for whatever reason, can't read
Yeah.
or don't have access to things. And if there's a way to make things available to them, great, all the better.
Mhm.
but like anything, it's a tool. We just have to be careful how far it goes into the work. But I think for now, some of the fiction stuff is safe for now. The high end fiction stuff. I don't think anybody wants a bot to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Do you ever meet the authors when you read these?
Yeah.
And do they
Sure.
have things like, I would like you to do this, or do they give you direction?
I've talked to a few before I've recorded their books, and generally speaking, they've just said, you do what you do. I don't want to give you too many notes. But there was a while where I was always reaching out to the author, even if I was just like, I didn't know them, but I would just go to their website and like email them like, hey, I'm about to narrate your book. Do you want to, say anything? Do you want to talk?
Yeah.
A lot of times they wouldn't respond. But then there's some that I've become friends with. It's been quite wonderful.
Yeah.
I've been out to dinner with them. I've seen
I would
them,
think they
like,
would have their favorites for sure. And,
yeah, they have their favorites.
it's like
and I hope-
directors have their favorite actors, that they like to,
Right.
and a lot of times that will be the representation of them,
Sure. I mean, we are kind of there being them in a different medium. And I hope that, authors in general, I hope they understand that, first of all, narrators work very hard. And it's not a particularly lucrative profession. I'll just put that out there. It doesn't come anywhere close to film and TV, obviously. That's where the big money is.
Yeah.
And so, the narrators work very hard, and now audiobooks can represent a sizable chunk of an author's audience, right? I don't know what the exact statistics are, but it can be like 20% of a book's sales are audio.
Yeah.
In some cases higher, 25, 30,
What do
and so if
you-
you think about it in those terms,
Yeah.
it's like 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4 people is listening to the book.
Yeah.
That kind of matters,
That's a
right?
big deal.
Because-
Yeah.
Yeah, because then your fans, your audience is going to, depending on the level and the quality of the performance, they're either going to like or not like your book. So
It makes a big difference. Let me
course.
settle this for me. If I've listened to an audiobook, have I read it? Can I say I've read the book?
Here we go. Yeah, the magic question. I'm gonna preface my answer by saying I don't care. Like it just strikes me as one of those like, Anyway,
I get that.
I have always said, for years, I said listened to a book, right? I didn't use the word read the book. Then it kind of like trended towards saying you've read the book, like whether you've listened to it or read it. Again, my point is like, I'm glad that people are, taking in these stories. I don't really care how.
Yeah.
And part of the whole, like, they're the old school purists who are like, no, listening is cheating or something like that, right? It's a little insulting to the people who can't read.
Yeah,
right?
it's very insulting. Very insulting.
It's like if you happen to be blind or dyslexic or something, and it's like, oh, you've consumed this in a lesser form. It's a little insulting, right?
I find it insulting. I like to listen to audiobooks. I don't know whether I've always been a slow reader, but for me,
I would also like to, and I'd also like to point out
accessible.
that, and I'm not the first to make this point, that the printing press came way later than the tradition of passing on stories.
Good point. That's a
Way
very good
later.
point.
I mean, hundreds, thousands of years later, right?
Such a good point. And Shakespeare didn't write his plays down. He just gave the parts out, like, to the different people. He didn't write it all in one volume until
eventually
afterwards.
Eventually
the folio came along, but
Yeah.
if they performed them first.
Right. Yeah, but I mean,
So that's how
the tradition
people,
of storytelling is telling people stories by voice, right?
Yeah.
And people were, I mean, even in the United States of America until the first part of the 20th century, like the percentage of people who were illiterate was incredibly high. I mean, you had mostly people working in like farming communities and this stuff, and they had no real reason to know how to read. And until we had a public school system, which kind of made it mandatory that everybody know how to read,
Yeah.
these people were not reading books.
And now they're
right?
trying to
And
get
so
rid of it.
Well, I know that's a whole other discussion, but no. So it strikes me as like the whole like, oh, the only proper way to consume a book is to read it in your hands. It strikes me as a bit elitist and a little kind of,
and also having
dangerous.
that kind of time. Like a lot of us listen to audiobooks like driving to work and running and doing stuff, so that having the time to sit down for many hours is sort of the place of the elite.
I know. Not everybody lives in that backdrop behind you.
Right, exactly.
By the fire. Right?
Sits by the fire with their cat.
Exactly. Just reading, the 800-page tome, it's like,
it's definitely a privileged thing for sure.
I saw, the other day I saw the postal carrier. She was coming down the street and I happened to be outside at the same time. And I noticed she had a phone clipped to her belt and she was listening to a book.
Yeah.
And she didn't have the earbuds in. It was just playing off of her phone.
Yeah.
And I thought that was so interesting.
Isn't
it's
it
like, she wouldn't be reading a book because she's working.
Yeah.
Right. She's delivering everybody's mail. And so to somehow say to her, like, oh, you didn't really read the book.
Yeah, that's not cool.
Like,
Okay. I'm glad we settled that.
We've settled it. It is settled.
All right. Well, we're going to have to end the show, unfortunately, but this has been so great. Yeah, we got to the hour.
It's crazy.
So that's fun. Really, really great information today.
My pleasure.
Really, really great to meet you, and just a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. So now it's the dance break.
Oh, right.
And we're gonna play Adam Pierce, one of our favorite performers. He's been on the show, doing a cover song. Guignel says he loved the interview. Thanks to both of you. He's down in Mexico, sitting on the beach, listening to our interviews. So that's great. Love that. Thanks, Guignel, for being here. Thanks, Ben McKnight. Thanks, Equal Means Equal. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you'll share this around. It's the holidays, so we don't get a lot of live viewers on the holidays. But this thing will be out there for people to hear and see. And also pick up some of Edoardo's books from Audible and different places. And check out. We didn't play a lot of clips today, but he's in a lot of movies and a lot of TV. You can check out his IMDb, and also we look forward to see the show on Hulu.
Yeah.
Murder at the End of the World. I'm hooked. I've seen the first episode. I'm going to be going all the way to the end because it's a really interesting show. All right, so dance break time. Here we go.
Am I going to be able to do this from my chair? Do I have to stand up?
You can do it from your chair, or you can stand up.
Because otherwise my head's going to be up here.
Yeah, I don't want you to bonk your head. Right. All right. No injuries. No injuries
on this show.
Welcome back, y'all. This song has been stuck in my head all week, so I decided to do it for you.
All right.
Hope you dig it.
Is leaving the station.
73 men sailed up from the San Francisco Bay, rode off of the ships, and here's what they had to say. We're calling everyone to ride along to another shore. We can laugh our lives away and be free once more. No one heard them calling, no one came at all, 'cause they were too busy watching those old raindrops fall. And as a storm was blowing out on a peaceful sea, 73 men sailing off to history. Say, ride, Captain, ride upon your mystery ship. Be amazed at the friends you have here on your trip. Ride, Captain, ride upon your mystery ship. On your way to a world that others might have missed.
All right, thank you, Edoardo. This has been an absolute pleasure. And we'll see everybody next week.
Awesome.
on Lunch Therapy. Thanks, Adam Pierce.